Right now we're in a pretty interesting spot with Cyberpunk 2077 in that we're kind of just waiting for a bunch of stuff to drop. The game is rapidly approaching 2 years old, and we've seen via leaks or even official announcements that there's still quite a bit of content on the way for this game, but also we've seen pretty recently how some of the plans for the future of Cyberpunk have definitely been changing. So in this video I want to go over what is actually happening right now with Cyberpunk 2077, when we are likely to see and hear more updates on both the next update and expansions, and even some of the leaks and other subtle things that have been going on with this game. So the two big things in the horizon for Cyberpunk are patch 1.6 and the first expansion, which is likely going to be the only expansion. And work on both patch 1.6 and the first expansion has definitely been progressing. We can see from SteamDB that there have been a couple of dev and even some QA branches that are consistently being updated. With one of the dev branches in particular, this likely being around patch 1.6, getting multiple updates per week over the past couple of months. There's definitely been a lot of activity here. There's this big unknown as to what exactly is coming with patch 1.6 for Cyberpunk. We have a few clues or hints here or there though. In their past earnings call, CD Projekt Red mentioned how we believe there's still many more console players to be reached, and this is our goal with the next large update, 1.6. They go on to also mention the expansion attracting console players, but perhaps there'll be some more console-focused things here. The larger context of this quote was how sales were increasing on consoles, but they think there's a much larger market they could be hitting on consoles, where many of the copies sold already are actually to PC users. A lot of this because, of course, the consoles, at least last gen on release, had pretty abysmal performance. So does this mean more console optimizations, further features around that, or is it just CDPR having an overall strategy to target console users? Patch 1.6 will almost certainly contain more of these free DLCs, which are basically just features at this point. Before we got any of the DLCs for Cyberpunk, there was a leak that seemed to indicate what the 17 free DLCs for this game would be, and then now it has been correct. For the 6 of these we've gotten 3 per major update, and going forward some of the things we could see slowly being implemented right now are things like a transmog system that's currently a work in progress. A variety of weapons were added to the game, these being in various states of completion. You could actually get them via console commands on PC, and there's even a new game plus in the leak overall, which of course many people are after. And although new weapons and features are great, many people are curious about more concrete details, some of the other quality of life or other long wanted features for this game, and one of the devs recently talked about this. But before we get into that, have you ever heard of Marvel? They're a company that's made a few movies now. They're a little bit on the more niche side, but perhaps some of you have heard of them. But for those of you who have heard of them, you'll probably love today's video sponsor with Marvel Strike Force. Marvel Strike Force is a mobile squad RPG where you build out your team of heroes and take on all kinds of unique threats from this universe. And I mean, the game basically just has all of the heroes and villains from the Marvel universe. There is a ridiculous amount of characters in this game, and you're going to want to collect them all and build out unique team synergies, as each character has their own unique abilities. But for any good story, you need a good threat, and not all as well, as the age of the apocalypse has arrived, which means very unique battles for you. And as you continue to level up, you'll unlock Apocalypse's legendary horsemen in special events throughout the year, with the next horseman being Rogue, and you even have the ability to choose the difficulty level of her famine event for some pretty epic challenges. So don't wait and download Marvel Strike Force to level up right now. And since you're watching this video, I'll let you in on a little secret. New users can actually unlock Thor, Loki, Rocket Raccoon, and Groot totally for free for a limited time only. Looking back at Cyberpunk, the quest director for this game regularly streams it, and recently he did give a pretty interesting answer about future updates.
Pablo, Cyberpunk still needs a ton of minor quality of life improvements, but I don't know if the game will be supported for so long to get them. I mean, Pablo, I think we are pretty much aware of that, and just let's see what happens, you know, Pablo. What do you think about this? You know, we didn't say that we are not working on the game. We even actually said that we are. So I think that you can trust that there's more things coming. So let's see what happens. How do you think, Pablo, about this? Like, we have done a lot of patches for Cyberpunk so far, you know? So I don't think you have a reasons to be worried, at least at this point, you know? You fucking go. I don't think you have many reasons to be worried.
So to me, I find this quote pretty interesting because I do wonder how many more updates Cyberpunk still has. As I wouldn't be shocked if there's only a couple left, like a big update with patch 1.6, the expansion, and then a couple of smaller updates in between, and that's really it. And I think a quote from their earnings call earlier in 2022 does kind of allude to this. They say, "We are also working on the next update, 1.6, which will be out in the coming months. Afterwards, support for Cyberpunk will continue, but our focus will gradually shift to new exciting endeavors in both Cyberpunk and the Witcher franchises." Which to me makes it sound like 1.6 is kind of an ending point, or at least a transitionary point to some degree, which to me actually makes a lot of sense. The last earnings report they put out, they actually gave us an updated look at the employee breakdown. This yellow bar is the ongoing support for Cyberpunk 2077, which as you can see has been getting smaller and smaller. And the overall allocation of CDPR developers, there's not many people working on Cyberpunk updates. There's a lot of people working on the Cyberpunk expansion though, that's in light blue. But to me, what this means is, even though this patch may have a 6-month window of development time, it's already been 4 months since the last update and 5 months since the last major update. This will probably be the smallest patch in terms of workforce. Less developers will work on patch 1.6 than any other patch for Cyberpunk, at least based on this graph. That being natural because many of the bugs have been fixed and people are moving on to the expansion. But when you look at some of those major and highly requested features like a police overhaul, police chases, and many other things, it seems like those are either coming with the first expansion or not coming at all. I can't imagine patch 1.6 will bring that stuff. So back to the quest director's quote, I imagine what this next update will entail is a bunch more of quality of life features and improvements just like patch 1.5, but perhaps on a bit of a smaller scale, and I just don't think there's that many big large scale patches left for Cyberpunk. A new proper DLC entry was recently added for Cyberpunk 2077 on Steam, this not being one of those free DLCs but likely the first expansion, because it's something that will seemingly cost money and be additional content to download. Officially, CDPR hasn't said much about the first expansion. We know it's coming at some point in 2023, and as of late they've been saying on Twitter how they're going to talk about it when the time is right, but I think that actually may be sooner than you think. During their last earnings call, they revealed how marketing for the Cyberpunk expansion is coming in the second half of 2022, which is right now. We are in the second half of 2022, so it technically could begin at any point, but as of late, CDPR has been doing very short marketing cycles, and although of course it'll be longer for the first expansion, when you look at some of the recent updates like the next-gen version and patch 1.5, which was the biggest and probably the most consequential update ever for this game, the one that really turned things around in a major way, that patch and the next-gen version were revealed and released on the exact same day. They seem to like or enjoy this short marketing to release cycle, so I imagine with this expansion that if they're starting marketing this year, it'll probably come very early next year, nothing like a late 2023 release, which is pretty exciting. If you are interested in the first expansion for Cyberpunk, the entire thing actually leaked. This was leaked by CD Projekt Red accidentally. I'm not going to reveal any of these spoilers here for obvious reasons. I imagine there's a good chunk of you that just want to play this and experience it for yourself. And you can find online some of the major story beats, as really what we're getting here is a quest leak. We don't know much about features, but as far as all of the quests and what they'll entail, we have a pretty good idea. This was actually done by mistake with patch 1.5. A bunch of files were mistakenly added to the live build of the game. Data miners found them and they realized, oh, hey, this is all of the quest details. And although this didn't actually leak publicly when patch 1.5 came out, and when those data miners found it, they held onto these files. And a couple of months ago, one of the data miners got in a Discord fight and ended up leaking the entire expansion online. And again, to be clear here, it's really a story leak. It'll show you what is going to be going on with all of the major quests, the characters involved, but we don't necessarily know what's coming feature-wise. But of course, the other important question is, when is this all coming? When do we learn more and actually get some release dates? CDPR has actually been talking quite a bit lately to commemorate 20 years of CDPR. They've been doing weekly streams on Wednesdays, and basically each week running through their games, and now they're actually on the Witcher 3 expansions. So seemingly, if this holds true, then next week will be Blood and Wine, and the week after that will be Cyberpunk 2077. That being August 10th, we could get news on Cyberpunk, or at least they'll talk about the game while live streaming it. Who knows if we'll hear anything here. It seems like a great opportunity to tease some parts of patch 1.6 and potentially even release patch 1.6. Again, there's been a ton of activity on the Steam testing branches, so 2 weeks from today, at least if you're watching this as it goes live, seems like a pretty good date for patch 1.6 to come out. But even beyond that, talking about the patch and expansions overall, we have Gamescom coming a bit later in August. Cyberpunk Edgerunners drops in September, so perhaps there's a tie-in or announcement around that. And if all else fails, they have have to talk to us on September 7th for their earnings report. But if you want to put your tinfoil conspiracy hat on, there's also some leaks around all of this. At any given point, there are a ton of 4chan posts being supposed Cyberpunk leaks. This likely because there have been so many legitimate leaks, like the DLCs leaking, the expansion leaking, and several other things. So it encourages a lot of fake leakers. But one recent one got a bit more attention than usual, and it lays out CDPR's supposed timeline for the future, claiming we'll start to hear more in August, and even in October, they will kick off Night City Wire once again to tease the expansion, which will eventually release in March with a soft relaunch of the game. Now, is this true? Almost certainly not, but it definitely has been making its rounds through some of these Cyberpunk 2077 communities. Although speaking of earnings, CDPR definitely hasn't been doing great post-launch of Cyberpunk 2077. The company is valued at just a quarter of what it was at its peak in the summer before the release of Cyberpunk. I know though, Cyberpunk 2077 undeniably sold a ton of copies. It definitely seems like it didn't do as well as CDPR had hoped or expected, largely because they've kind of shifted their entire company strategy and their plans for this game in a fairly monumental way. Cyberpunk is still getting support, it's still getting expansions, it's still getting updates, and there's even more free DLCs to come. With that said though, it does seem like the multiplayer mode is all but canned and it's only getting one expansion, when it definitely looks like, based on past quotes, they had plans for multiple expansions just like The Witcher 3, at least earlier on in development. And although there's been a lot of clues and hints around this, the one pretty concrete quote that confirms we're only getting one expansion and no multiplayer mode was given during the last earnings call, where they mention the Cyberpunk expansion is the last product based on Red Engine and further products will be based on Unreal Engine, which is pretty concrete confirmation. There's no multiplayer mode because the multiplayer mode would be on Red Engine. There's no expansion 2 because that 2 would be on Red Engine, which when you take that all together, I wouldn't be surprised if there's only a couple more major updates for this game. Perhaps patch 1.6, patch 1.7, which is the expansion, or maybe they'll just call it 2.0, maybe one major update after that, and that could be it, with a couple of small updates intermingled in between. Although if you're playing on PC, don't fret, and if you're not playing on PC, you can buy Cyberpunk on PC using my GOG affiliate link down below if you're interested. But mods on PC have been thriving. We now have police chases with even more features and smarter AI, flying vehicles, and even a full-on texting expansion that just recently came out. And though we got some pretty crazy mods already, there is this notion or hope that CDPR will drop mod tools at some point. A lot of people in the community hold out for that day. And I mean, they even hired a bunch of developers of one of the most useful and powerful modding tools with WovenKit to work directly at CDPR. And WovenKit itself is even still being regularly updated by those people who are now employees of CD Projekt Red. The unfortunate reality though is it seems pretty unlikely that we get a full-scale modding support like you have with Bethesda games, which seems to be the common comparison point, because fundamentally Cyberpunk 2077 is just not nearly as moddable. Fallout 4 and Skyrim's creation engine makes modding way more accessible compared to Red Engine, which Cyberpunk 2077 is on. CDPR has already released official modding support tools, which make some of the other fan-made tools possible. And there is an ever-growing collection of tools to make modding easier than ever for Cyberpunk, but it's still not easy. It's still a pretty big challenge. And some stuff is still incredibly difficult or just downright impossible. And right now in the active modding community, the consensus seems to be that there aren't going to be easy and incredibly accessible tools ever. Perhaps we get a bit more from CDPR down the line, but again, if you're somebody who's hoping for a Skyrim level of moddability, that will almost certainly never be happening. But at the same time, there's people still doing incredible things with the modding tools we have right now, and again, these are mostly fan-made. Or I guess technically the modding tools are made by a CDPR employee, but in his free time not using official resources. Either way, that's what's going on with Cyberpunk 2077 right now. What you could expect in the future, where I think things are heading, and hopefully we're not too far off from finding out something more. At the very least, in about 5-6 weeks, we'll definitely get some answers at their earnings call, and I think very likely before that. Between Gamescom, the Cyberpunk stream they are doing, as well as some other day in between, they'll probably mention something about patch 1.6. As always again though, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you guys found this one informative, and with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.